If you had to pick like one or two things that you think are going to drive a USC victory, we'll start with Matt because I know Tim chimed in a little bit already, but we'll go to you as well. But Matt, what do you think USC needs to do to beat Michigan here?
So the thing I've already said, and it requires no elaboration at all, just don't give Michigan any freebies or cheapies. That's number one. But beyond that, USC's offensive line has to stand up to Michigan's defensive line. And obviously dominating would be great, but play to a draw. Don't get beaten outright. Like, make sure that it's a pretty even fight in the trenches, because if we say that it's an even battle, that means that Michigan's not consistently caving the pocket. Michigan's not consistently creating negative plays. That USC is in second and medium, third and if not short yardage, maybe just 3 or 4 yards, such that you can just throw a 3 or 4 yard pass to move the sticks. As long as USC's offensive line can at least play to a draw against Michigan's defensive front, it likely points to Miller Moss not being too uncomfortable. It points to USC having some degree of time of possession and therefore field position as well. You're at least getting 2-3 first downs a drive. You punt the ball and you put Michigan inside its own 15-yard line. That gets back to what I've said. If you make Michigan drive 80 yards and you don't hand deliver Michigan any cheap points or short fields, USC, if that's the kind of game that's played, USC probably wins. So it really goes to USC's offensive line, because I love this USC defense. You asked earlier, what's been the change? Well, we went from having a completely incompetent staff to a very professional staff. I mean, that's really the long and short of it. And I'm sold on this staff. It's not blind faith either, because we saw D'Anton Lynn transform a pretty average group of UCLA players into a good, tough, physical defense. And by the way, let's talk about UCLA just for a moment to underscore how great D'Anton Lynn was.
Yeah, I know where you're going.
UCLA just got dump trucked by Indiana, losing by 29 at home, giving up 42 points. D'Anton Lynn, that game probably would have been 13-13 heading into the final few minutes. So the regression we've instantly seen at UCLA only magnifies D'Anton Lynn even more. So again, it's not blind faith in D'Anton Lynn. There's already a track record that he's accumulating. So I'm sold on USC's defense and its ability to contain Michigan, as long as the USC offensive line can do a reasonably good job. Doesn't have to hit it out of the park. Doesn't have to be Miggy Cabrera 2013. As long as USC, hits a solid double and can, pretty much play even against Michigan's defensive front, I'm pretty confident of a USC victory. But I do need to see this offensive line on the road in the big house perform up to that standard.
Yeah. I liked what Victor Rocha said, and kind of go along with, I already told you guys what my keys were, but Matt, I like what you said, but I'd even go a step further. The thing USC has to watch out for is we're talking about Michigan. We're talking about the defensive line. And if you're going to have a defensive line where you're going to let Graham and Grant just kind of take over the game, that's the key to victory for Michigan. And so Victor was saying, do you think the SC is going to run the ball more? And I think that you have to keep Michigan honest. If they can pin their ears back and come after Miller, Matt, like you said, they don't have to win the battle. I mean, what they got to do is just not let Michigan dominate the battle. If they, like you said a stalemate, play them to the middle, just kind of hold them off, then yeah, I mean, that's good. Or even just lose slightly the battle, but just don't let those guys play like the NFL studs that they're going to be and just kind of run Miller. I'm visions of like Notre Dame last year with Caleb, where just the offensive line was just folding. This offensive line is not giving us any inclination that that's going to be the case in any game this year. But this is probably going to be a hell of a test for them. And if they can play it to, like you said, to a draw, or just maybe concede a little bit, but not let them take over this game and run the ball and play balanced football, then that's also gonna be very important. So yeah, I think you're right on that.
Yeah, so my three keys of the game are, especially for Michigan, is sustained drives for a dual purpose. One, keeping our defense off the field, giving our defense time to rest, and then keeping Miller Moss off the field, Lincoln Riley's offense off the field. The more that is, the better. The other one is we need pressure. Last week we got one sack against Arkansas State, against that porous offensive line of Arkansas. We got one sack with our defensive line. The week prior, we got 0 sacks against Texas. We have got to get pressure. We have got to get to Miller Moss to make him uncomfortable. And then my last key to victory is we have to hold them to field goals. We cannot allow touchdowns. So if we can at least hold them to preferably 3 and outs and no points, but if we are going to allow them to get some form of points, let's hold them to field goals. If we can do that, I do believe Michigan can come out with the victory.
USC has dropped, like flat out dropped, or have not secured the ball, by my count, at least 4 to 5 times this year. 2 of those times they ended up scoring a touchdown, but it's a couple, it was close. The other times they did have settle for field goals. It should have been touchdowns. That's why Miller Moss, I believe he has like 1 or 2 I think he has 2 touchdown passes on the season. That stat is broken. He should have 5 to 6, but
I agree.
I mean, that's why you play the game. You got to make the plays. And like you said, TJ, if SC settling for field, I said that too. I said you can't settle for field goals. You got to push it for touchdowns. That's gonna be key for this game for both teams.
Yeah, one thing to even dive more, you guys mentioned earlier the red zone issues, that there were actually some red zone issues on USC's offense. One thing Wink Martindale needs to do is to stop substituting so much, and especially in the red zone. I understand you need to rest guys, and I get that. And hopefully Alex Orji and Khalil Mullings and the O-line, and hopefully Crippen starts, and they can just kind of keep the defense a little bit more rested. But in the red zone, you can't put the second string in against USC. It's not going to work. It didn't even work against Arkansas freaking State. So you really can't do it against USC. So I think that's the biggest one. Wink Martindale just needs to do a better job of personnel management. And if he does that, and he can obviously, dial up some more exotic pat looks, then I think we're on to something. What I've seen so far, so I think they need to pull some things that we just haven't seen yet, to be honest.
TJ, so what, for Michigan, what are the keys to a Michigan win?
Yeah, so the keys for Michigan to achieve a victory on Saturday is they must sustain drives offensively. They cannot have 3 and outs. They have to sustain drives for 2 reasons. One, allowing our defense to get rest and not get exhausted by going against the Lincoln Riley offense and the Miller Moss passing attack. And then the other variable there is allowing Miller Moss to not be on the field. If we do not allow Miller Moss to be on the field, Miller Moss cannot score. That is a key. We have to do that. The other key to the game, which we did touch on, was Michigan must get pressure. If Michigan does not get pressure on Miller Moss, it is going to be a long day. It is going to be a day similar to Texas, is what my concern is, if we do not dial up pressure. Because the reason why that's going to be is we're going to, one, get tired, which when you're going in a track meet with an offense like this, that's a very bad recipe for success. If you are exhausted going against a high octane offense, especially with an elite passer that we're looking at in Miller Moss, that's deadly. So we cannot allow it to happen. We must get pressure. We must disrupt their offense, get them out of rhythm, disrupt the flow. And then my last key is we have to, if they do sustain drives, we have to hold them field goals. We cannot allow 7, because I do think Michigan is going to have some challenge scoring. Now, will they score? Yes. How much will they score? That's the question. What is this offense's potential with Alex Orji? It's to be seen. So we don't fully know yet. But what I do know is if we can at least hold them to 3, and that allows Michigan to if they can get 7 on their drives, that'll make Michigan a far more competitive opponent for USC this Saturday.
TJ, do we know the health status of Colston Loveland? And if he can't go, it looked like the tight ends filled in pretty well last week. But what does the depth chart look like?
Yep. So Colston Loveland is the injury is less serious than originally expected. I would say there's about a 60 to 70% chance he plays. It's still unsure because practice, there hasn't been anything that really has leaked from practice yet, but I would say we're at 60-70%. If Colston Loveland is unable to play, expect Hogan Hansen to fill the inline blocker role, and then expect Marlon Klein to do more the Y tight end position, where he's going to be split out into the slot or potentially even in the X role. Marlon Klein is a tight end that we have been talking about a lot this offseason as a name to know, because he runs a 10.8 100-meter at 6'4", 250. He has been said by Kirk Campbell, who has coached Pat Fryermuth. He's coached obviously Colston Loveland and a few other prominent name tight ends. He has said that Marlon Klein is the most athletic tight end he has ever coached. He's more athletic than Colston Loveland. Now, it does not make him better than Colston Loveland. Obviously, it's more than just athletic ability, but he is an up-and-coming name that we are hoping that becomes a name this season.
This is another angle that fascinates me, and Tim and Matt could probably correct me on making this comparison, but USC seems like it's a pretty similar offense in regards to skill level, the quarterback, the style of quarterback play to Texas. They seem pretty comparable in a lot of ways. You know, Tim highlighted that the USC offensive line is not as good as Texas's. You could say that the USC wide receiver room is probably a little bit better than Texas. We could make all sorts of little adjustments, but they seem to be stylistically, athletically very similar. Their quarterbacks are not runners, they're throwers, they're precision passers. Again, the game that Miller Moss put out there against LSU is one of the most impressive quarterback displays, considering his lack of experience, in addition, that I've seen in a long time. And so is Michigan smart enough, Sharon Moore and his coaching staff, I wouldn't have been hesitant about this in previous years with Jim Harbaugh at the helm, to self-scout and to say, you know, we're going to see something similar. Of course, there are different nuances, but we're looking at two elite play callers and offensive technicians in Sark and Lincoln Riley, that can we clean up how we got shredded when Texas came to town?
Well, that's one of the big questions for us as Michigan fans, because we are not seeing self-scouting or self-reflection right now. We see it almost looks like they're trying to force things. They're not. We have some issues on Michigan right now that the fan base thinks the fan base feels confident in the answer, but the coaching staff is showing us through results that they don't agree with what the fan base is seeing. I'll give you an example. We believe majority of the fan base would say Khalil Mullins should be RB1. Well, the coaching staff appears to want to make Donovan Edwards RB1, but it's quite clear that Khalil Mullins is the better back. At center, Greg Crippen looks like the better player, but like Sharon Moore just made a comment today that they graded Dominic Giudice higher, which is crazy because I've watched the game twice, and Crippen, when he's out there, the offense actually performs better. There's more push, more gaps. It actually looks a lot better with Crippen out there. So I don't know what he's seeing. And then we have an issue at right tackle. So there are these issues that we're not seeing the coaching staff identify. Like, it appears they're not recognizing. It just seems an inexperienced coach like Sharon Moore, what we're finding is he doesn't have a feel for the program. That is a concern right now. Now it's early, the sample size is small, but that's the early read. And a lot of fans in the fan base right now are getting a little concerned about it. So to say that, are we self-scouting from Texas to USC? I hope, but I don't know yet. The sample size is so small on what we're getting, but the coaching staff, and I've made this announcement to our community, has lost my trust. I do not trust our coaching staff. They've not shown us from spring portal, from spring ball all the way to the start of the year, that they have a pulse of the program and that they are identifying strengths and weaknesses or putting players in the best position to succeed. Because that's another issue. Why is Donovan Edwards not being utilized in the slot? Why is Colston Loveland not being put in the X position? Because he'd be the optimal. He can play X. He can do that. You can use Marlon Klein as your inline tight end or Hogan Hansen. There are ways to utilize these players to be better, or putting your best players on the field. We're not seeing it, and we don't know why. Like, many in the fan base are actually in agreement with what we think is ideal, and Sharon Moore is doing the opposite on some of these.
I think in terms of drilling deep on a comparison between the USC offense and Texas offense, I think one of the things is that Texas's offensive line set a very high standard. I don't think USC is going to match that standard, but I will say if USC can come even modestly close, that's probably going to be good enough. And on our Michigan show with TJ and John, Tim and I both were in agreement that, you know what, USC doesn't have to dominate Michigan's defensive line up front. Just don't get dominated. Pretty much play it even, prevent the negative plays, make sure Miller Moss has enough time to throw. Because like if you use the LSU game as a parallel, USC didn't dominate in the run game. USC didn't really run block all that well against LSU. But for the most part, Miller Moss was clean. Now, Miller Moss was throwing the ball fairly quickly, but nevertheless, like in 2-minute drills, late half drives, he generally had enough time to throw. And so if we get that kind of situation where, this is not one-way traffic, the pocket isn't always caving in on Miller Moss, and he generally has enough time and space to make the kind of throws that he made against LSU, and he made a lot of great throws. If he gets a reasonable amount of time and he's not overwhelmed the way Caleb Williams has been with the Bears behind that Swiss cheese offensive line, if Miller Moss has a fundamental comfort level, that should be good enough for USC. Won't guarantee it, but like that would be certainly a step forward for USC if Miller Moss has pretty much the same amount of time he had against LSU, maybe a little bit more since this is a true road game. But fundamentally, like if that bar gets set pretty much where it was set against LSU, should be good enough against Michigan.
Yeah, I think that's a key. Like, does Michigan get pressure on Miller Moss? Do they make him uncomfortable? Are they able to push up the middle and affect the pocket? Now, we have had 1 sack in 2 weeks. That's where we are with this defensive line. This defensive line that is featuring 2 potential first-round picks and then 2 returners who are arguably starters last year on our defense in Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore. And then we have an up-and-comer in TJ Guy that everyone's very high on. So can they get it together? Can Wink Martindale dial up effective blitzes and coverages because you can get coverage sacks too, right? So can they dial it up correctly to make Miller Moss uncomfortable? That is going to be an extremely important key to this game.